fish catch are concentrated along the shores where this coastal upwelling occurs. So, coastal upwelling is an example of an important process that is sustained by vertical motions, but it is a large-scale process. However, the mesoscale motions which occur at smaller scales are also very important and are a recognized source of vertical motions in the ocean. So through several mechanisms, which I have noted here at least 3 of them, we know that the mesoscale motions are capable of inducing strong vertical motions in the ocean. And that these mesoscale motions, they drive also important biogeochemical process in the oceans, and again such as this vertical flux of nutrients into the euphotic zone. And you can observe here in this satellite picture that around these mesoscale eddies we see a very large concentration of chlorophyll, meaning that there is a lot of production of biological matter associated with these eddies. So those motions that I've discussed, and especially mesoscale motions, they are turbulent. And turbulence is perhaps the natural state of fluid flows in the ocean, and most of us have been introduced to turbulence, and as according to definitions such as this, that turbulence is irregular and seemingly random motion of a fluid. But if we look at certain depictions of turbulence, such as this one, where you can see these very nice whirlwinds, and also perhaps a more familiar one, here the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci, we do not see irregular or random motion, but we see very clear structures in these depictions of turbulence. The whirlwinds, like I said, and also here with Da Vinci we can see the vortices of several scales, and also these very finely structures. So the notion that turbulence is completely irregular and random perhaps is not correct. And it has been stated that instead of a purely random phenomenon, turbulence has a clearly organized structure. And this clearly organized structure of turbulence occurs mainly in the form of coherent structures. So, what are coherent structures in turbulence? Well, there are a lot of definitions. Most of them are numerical, but I very much like this one, which is very general and simple to understand, that coherent structures are features of the flow field that last long enough to be observed. So, some of these coherent structures are very well known, such as these 3 examples that I show you here. But there are other coherent structures that are not so well known, but are very important in this work. And here I put the hairpin vortices in a turbulent boundary layer. So this is the flow. This is a flat plate, and we have here the flow, and we have these structures in the turbulent flow that are clearly visible, and seems to be actually a kind of organization. And the other example, also perhaps the most important, is again the oceanic mesoscale eddy. That here we can observe it again by looking at chlorophyll concentration. So this is the definition of a coherent structure. And these coherent structures, they have been mainly studied from the Eulerian perspective, where we look at correlations between space and time variables, and we look to see if there is any coherence. But there is another perspective to fluid flows, that is the Lagrangian perspective, where we look at the material properties of the flow, especially the study of particle trajectories or the deformation of tracer patches. Now, this perspective implies the following, that it gives us a direct connection to transport, and because of course we are looking at the actual fluid that is in motion, the material fluid that is in motion. And the other possibility is that we can analyze it using the dynamical systems theory. And this is done mainly by considering that fluid particle trajectories are the trajectories in the phase space of a dynamical system. So, if you look at the equation for a general dynamic system, and if you think of the x as the position of a particle, then you see that this equation, it gives you the trajectory. When solved, will give you the trajectory of this particle under a velocity field u. So when we look at dynamical systems and we focus specifically on autonomous system, we will see that these systems, they admit fixed points, which are points where this forcing is equal to 0. Some of these fixed points, the hyperbolic fixed points, they have properties that are termed some stable and unstable manifolds, and these stable and unstable manifolds, they govern the behavior of particles in their vicinity. So in time-dependent flows, we can observe coherent behaviors of particles, and these allow the identification of distinct coherent motions of the particles. Mainly, we can identify local stretching through the divergence of the particles, but also we can observe thinning and folding as particles follow curved boundaries. And these Lagrangian coherent motions, they are pretty much related to what we could see when particles approach an hyperbolic fixed point in an autonomous system. But in time-dependent flows, fixed points do not exist. So there is a similar definition to these stable and unstable manifolds of fixed points that are that we call Lagrangian coherent structures, that are the regions of the flow where we can observe these coherent motions. And these Lagrangian coherent structures actually are the time-dependent equivalent of these stable and unstable manifolds of fixed points. So by observing stretching and thinning and folding, we can identify these Lagrangian coherent structures by computing the maxima of stretching measures in forward and backward time evolution. What this means is that we expect that the Lagrangian coherent structures are the ones that will cause the strongest type of Lagrangian coherence motions, such as these ones. And of course, both these ones involve the stretching and the divergence of nearby particles. So in this work, we have used the stretching measures that is called the finite size Lyapunov exponent, and it computes the rate of divergence of two nearby particles from an initial distance to a final distance. So we can use it to detect Lagrangian coherent structures, and we find that there are two kinds of Lagrangian coherent structures. In forward time evolution, where we have divergence of particles and stretching of the fluid, we find the repelling Lagrangian structures. On the other hand, when we look at the backward time evolution, we see that we can, applying the same computation of stretching, but on backwards time, we can identify the attracting Lagrangian structures, which are the Lagrangian structures to it that attract and stretch the material fluid. But in backward time, the effect is to stretch. So by applying the same measure of stretching, we can identify these two opposite kinds of behaviors. And so, since we can use the FSLE to detect these Lagrangian coherent structures, we have used the following algorithm to use it. So we take a domain and we define initial and final distances, and we set up a regular grid of initial conditions, and then we release particles from the initial conditions and track the trajectories. Of course, and our purpose is to calculate the time that it takes until this interparticle separation reaches the F. And then, by computing the finite size Lyapunov exponent, we can obtain a map of stretching intensity in this fluid domain. So, observing the map, we can, in 2 dimensions, we can readily identify the maxima, because they will appear at this, as these very strong regions that have FSLA. Very high FSLA. But in 3 dimensions, the problem is that you have a volume, so that these maxima, they are hidden in the volume data. So we use here, to extract the maxima, we use the concept of the ridge of a scalar field. So what is a ridge? So a ridge is simply a place where if you go along the ridge, you go up and down, but if you move sideways to the ridge, you will necessarily go down. So a ridge, a point that belongs to a ridge if it is a local maximum of the scalar field in one given direction, and the direction to which P is a maximum is also the direction of the fastest descents of F, of the field. So this is the definition of a ridge point, and when we take our field of finite size Lyapunov exponent, we extract the ridges by using a matching method, which means that we compute this criteria at every point. And of course, not all ridges have the same strength, and when I say strength, I mean the convexity of the ridge. So, and actually we are only interested in the strongest ridges. So we filter these results to obtain only the strongest ridges. So to sum up our methodology, what we do firstly is to compute the 3D finite size Lyapunov exponent fields, and then we extract the ridges of this finite size Lyapunov exponent fields that in 3 dimensions are surfaces. So we can extract them both the forward, the repelling and attracting Lagrangian structures, the ridges, but we are mostly interested in the attracting Lagrangian structures because it is along these attracting structures that filamentation occurs. Moreover, although we are focused on the ridges, the 3D FSLF field is also important. So during the work we have also studied the properties of this field. So to move on to the first study that we did, where we focused on 3D Lagrangian structures in turbulent flows, we were interested in answering the following questions. If we can use the FSLAE to identify Lagrangian structures in 3D turbulent flows, how are these 3D Lagrangian structures related to the Eulerian structures? And are they Lagrangian at all? Very important question. What I mean by this is, do they actually influence the particle trajectories and tracer patches? This is because in the Lagrangian perspective, we look at this kind of features. So our first study was done in a turbulent channel flow, which is a flow between 2 parallel plates. This flow is characterized by the width of the distance between the plates and also the mean velocity. So most of our results will be expressed in these wall variables that are adimensional variables. So we have performed direct numerical simulations with a pseudospectral solver that is available here in this address. This was a periodic channel except in the wall normal direction, and the variables pressure were discretized in Fourier and Chebyshev modes. And we used a Reynolds number based on the centralized velocity of about 4,000. And of course, we did our FSLE calculations by defining the initial distance and the final distance, and also a particle integration interval. And the reason we chose this turbulent channel flow is because this is a very well-studied canonical turbulent flow, and we know that it's very rich in terms of Lagrangians, in terms of coherent structures, as you can observe here. So, first, I'd like to show you how does the finite size Lyapunov exponent distribution looks like. So here we have a vertical section of the channel, and we can see that it is mainly characterized by these sloping structures here that rise from the wall, both on this wall and that wall. And at the center of the channel, the FSLE distribution is fairly low when compared to the wall region. And back here we have a horizontal map of the FSLA. It was taken near the wall, so more or less at this height. And mainly what we can see is that the high values of FSLE are distributed in this kind of cylindrical shapes. So when we do an average of the FSLE along this direction, and here I show only half the channel, we can see that it obtained a maximum here in this region, close to the wall. And this region is known in the literature as the region where the turbulence production is maximum. So, to further explore the characteristics, we have computed autocorrelations of the finite size exponent field, mainly in the longitudinal direction and also in the cross channel direction. And so in the longitudinal, from the longitudinal autocorrelations, we found that these structures, they have a typical length of about 500 adimensional length units. And the cross-channel correlation gives us a typical width of the structures of about 100 adimensional length units. So these dimensions are consistent with the dimensions of coordinate structures, but obtained from the Eulerian perspective. And so when we obtained these results, we were pretty sure that there was a good match between the Eulerian structures and the Lagrangian structures that we were identifying. So when we look at the cross-stream plane and we compare to the Eulerian velocity field, we can see that there are some points of similarity, especially here when we have this this curved high FSLE region. We can see that it corresponds to the same position where we have very high straining. I mean, in the sense that we have a vortex rotating in this direction, and then here we have the flow going in the opposite direction, so that along the area where these two touch, we have a large straining. Moreover, we have observed what happened to particles that were released from near the wall, and when we observe its movement, we see that it is clearly correlated with the shape of these FSLE, high FSLE lines. So this was a kind of a confirmation that actually these structures, they did have a strong relation to the motion of particles, which is something that we were looking for. And so now I will show you a small animation of how these structures, they move actually with time. So I hope to show you. Right. So what you can see is that the structures, so we have the high FSLE near the wall and the sloping structures up to this. This is more or less the center of the channel. And you can see that the structures, they are deforming, but they are moving pretty much constantly along the mean with the mean flow velocity, which is from left to right. And so we wanted to see what was the relation between the speed at which these structures are moving and the velocity and the Eulerian velocity field. And we did that, and we saw that these structures, they are moving at approximately the same mean velocity as the Eulerian velocity field. It means they are being carried by the flow. And so this was a sign that these structures, they really had a material nature. And so finally, when we look at the three-dimensional ridges of the field, first we observe that they have a very complex shape, and the most striking feature is that they seem to form a boundary between a region with very low FSLE, here in this blue part of the map, of the transverse map, and below the structures, which is maybe a little hard to see, and below the structures we have all this kind of high FSLE lines. So what we concluded was that these Lagrangian structures in 3D, they form the boundary between the near wall region, where you have high FSLE lines, and the outer region near the center of the channel, which is located around this area, where you have a very low intensity turbulence. So our conclusions from this analysis of the turbulent channel flow was that the FSLE, it can be used to identify the Lagrangian structures. These structures, they have dimensions similar to Eulerian structures. That the three-dimensional structures, they separate the channel flow into these two regions of high intensity near the wall and low intensity near the center of the channel, and that they move with the mean flow, and they show a clear impact on particle trajectories. So by this time we were convinced that we were looking at actual 3D Lagrangian coherent structures, and so we moved to identify them in oceanic flows. And of course, here we wanted to know their characteristics in mesoscale oceanic flows. Again, if they are related to what is known as the mesoscale coherent structures, but from an Eulerian point of view. And how do they affect transport and mixing in the ocean? And this because because of our notion that Lagrangian coherent structures should be related to the transport and mixing of the fluid material. So our first study was in the Benguela upwelling region, which is a very well-known coastal upwelling. So from what I've shown in the introduction, and it also has intense mesoscale activity. So here we used the data that was kindly provided to us by our collaborators in Lagos. This here is from a three-dimensional simulation of the Benguela region done with the ROMS model. It had a resolution of 12 kilometers, and so we computed the 3D FSLE fields. They were computed daily for 30 days, and we have used the initial distance of 3 kilometers, a final distance of 100 kilometers, and also we have computed them on 30 vertical layers with an integration interval of 6 months. So, of course, when we go to the ocean, and bearing in mind that the vertical velocities are much smaller than horizontal ones, we of course had the problem of finding that the horizontal dispersion was much higher than the vertical. So instead of computing the FSLE using also the vertical dispersion of particles, we looked only at the horizontal dispersion because it's dominating. But again, we left the particles integration in 3 dimensions, so that the particle trajectories are 3-dimensional. So again, I'll start by showing you the FSLE field. Here is at the horizontal layer taken at 100 meters depth. Well, you can see, so this is the integrating backwards. We have the unstable manifolds and the attracting structures. Integrating forwards, we have the repelling structures. And there are 2 conclusions that we drawn from here, is that these high FSLE are concentrated on very thin structures. They are practically lines, and also that they are all over the domain. The proliferation indicates that we have chaotic behavior of particles, and so we have intense mixing in the sense that the fluids from one region of the domain will eventually end up very fast in another region of the domain. So then we extracted the ridges, and the first thing that we observed was that they have predominantly a vertical shape. and we concluded that this is the effect of the predominance of horizontal dispersion in the ocean, because the Lagrangian structures, they should be normal to the strongest direction of dispersion, which is the horizontal in this case. Moreover, you can see that the ridges, they fall on the FSLA maxima in 2D plots, and you can be observed here. And also we found that the ridge strength, the intensity of the ridge, it varies with that. And this was interesting because it means that the dispersion is getting weaker as we go deeper in this case. So this was a general view, and now we looked at what happens with a specific mesoscale eddy. So what we did, we released particles inside an eddy at several depths, and we watched and we computed their evolution. And here we plotted this evolution together with the attracting and repelling Lagrangian structures, and you can see that along the evolution between 1 month evolution, you see that the particles, the most of the particles, they are maintained inside this space defined by the Lagrangian structures. However, we found there is an episode of filamentation, where you see a filament of particles leaving the eddy and evolving along the attracting structure, which is so actually the first time I saw this, I was preoccupied because it seemed that the particles, they were crossing this Lagrangian structure, and that was really bad if it was true, because these are supposed to be material surface, so we can't have particles crossing them. But we took a closer look at what was happening, and then we found that they were not crossing the structure, but instead on a particular moment there was an opening here. And then we observed that some particles had crossed the opening, and they were flowing on the other side. And then when they reached the attracting structures, both particles diverged, and then we had the formation here, and then we have the formation of a filament. And so we were looking at Lagrangian structures that were really impacting the trajectory of particles, but we still wanted to see how these particles, they related to the Eulerian, to the non-Eulerian measures of identifying coherent structures. And so here we have again, and I apologize, but this image didn't end up in the memory. So. But here we have the repelling and the attracting Lagrangian structures, and they are their intersections and tangencies. They define a space inside where a mesoscale eddy is located. And here in red, I show you it's an isosurface of what is called the Q criteria. The Q criteria is a criteria that is used to identify eddies in Eulerian perspective. And basically, it is a measure of the relative strength between rotation, here given by this omega squared, and straining, which is given by the S squared. So positive areas of the Q criteria are rotation dominated, and they correspond to eddies, while negative do not. And so when we plot an isosurface with a very small but positive value of the Q criteria, whatever is inside is, by the definition, an eddy. So what this means is that both criteria, the Lagrangian coherent structures and also the Q, are identifying the eddy roughly in the same place. But as you can see, these black dots, they are particles. While the particles follow the Lagrangian structures, and they do not cross it, and well, like I showed you, they are not actually crossing this one. they are actually crossing the Eulerian Q isosurface. So this means that the particles are insensitive to this criteria, and it was a further reinforcement of our idea that to look at material transport, you have to look at Lagrangian measures and not Eulerians. So conclusions about this study. We found that at the mesoscale, the Lagrangian structures, they populate the ocean, at least that part of the ocean, and they give rise to strong Lagrangian mixing. They are quasi-vertical structures in 3 dimensions due to the predominance of horizontal dispersion, and they can control the transport of material into and out of a mesoscale area. So this was our first study, and now we devoted our attention to the problem of stirring in the Peruvian oxygen minimum zone. So oxygen minimum zones, what are they? They are a region of the ocean where there is a permanent deficit of dissolved oxygen. You can see they are located on these regions where you have very low oxygen concentrations. You can also see that there is a clear relation between the location of the oxygen minimum zones and here the zones where you have a very high primary production, which also correspond roughly to the zones where you have strong coastal upwelling. So the oxygen minimum zones, how they are formed? Well, basically, when you have near the surface, you have production of biological matter by photosynthesis. So we have production of oxygen when in the euphotic zone, in the zone where you have photosynthesis. But then below, you don't have photosynthesis, and you have respiration, which consumes oxygen. And so below this area, the levels of oxygen are lower than at the top. Moreover, these zones they have a very weak circulation, so oxygenated waters do not reach these areas, and then the consumption of oxygen will inevitably lower the oxygen content to very small levels. So so we look at this area to study, and again we use the data from our collaborators and colleagues at Lagos that very kindly provided the hydrodynamic data and also the biogeochemical data for this study. So the data is climatological, so it's an annual cycle. And there is physical biological coupling where you have the variation of a quantity is given not only by the advection and diffusion, which are physical processes, but also by biogeochemical processes here collected in this term. And of course, this biogeochemical part is very complex, and you can see here that there is a lot of interaction between the different species. So this is the framework which allows us to compute the flow and both its effect on the biological species. So we computed the 3D FSLA fields. They were computed in an interval of 3 days for 1 year of the simulation. We have used the initial distances of this year will be approximately 3 kilometers. We have kept the final distance at 100 kilometers, which I recall is a length scale associated to mesoscale phenomena, and we have integrated the particles for 6 months. And now, to show you another animation, if I may. So to the left, we see the FSLA field, and it's again we see that it's the FSLA is populating the whole area, but to the right we see the oxygen field superimposed with the highest finite size Lyapunov exponent lines, and we can see that there is a clear relation between the strong. You can see there's a very clear relation between strong variations, spatial variations of the oxygen content and the presence of high FSLE lines, especially here at the north, but also here in the south. We see that these very high gradients, they are the very high changes, very strong changes. They are limited by the lines of strong FSLE, and so this observation. This observation led us to hypothesize that there could be a strong correlation in the FSLE, which are a measure of stirring and mixing, and the oxygen field. And so we proceeded to analyze this possible relation. So firstly, I show you here this is a nearly average of the oxygen minimum zone. So this would be the average boundary of the OMZ. Here we define the OMZ as being where you have oxygen concentrations less than 20 micromolars. So this would be the three-dimensional OMC here inside, and here we have an FSLE map, horizontal map, and you can see that the OMZ boundaries, they coincide fairly well with these high stirring, high FSLE regions. So this was a very inspiring finding. We tried to corroborate it, and especially what we did, we computed the zonal averages of the FSLE and the O2 gradient, and we see that they are fairly well correlated in a range of depths between 300 and 600 meters, and we obtained this correlation coefficient of 0.71. But we've also found that this, although this there is a good correlation at these depths, it's not the good correlation does not occur across all depths. So only in these depths we could find a good correlation. And so we had seen that this correlation was solid, let's say, but we wanted to know why. So I'll show you this video. And here you can observe, so this white line is the boundary of the OMZ, and here you can see high FSLE lines controlling the entrance of high oxygen into the OMZ. So we found that O2 anomalies going into the OMC here at the southern border are clearly related to the passage of high FSLE lines. So you can see here where you can see this high anomaly of oxygen being delimited by the FSLE lines. And actually this was for one episode, but if you compute this average anomaly along the border, you can see that on the north boundary and on the south boundary, you can see that it is a recurrent phenomenon, and especially at the northern part it's quite fairly regular, while at the southern part it's more irregular, but actually you see the stronger episode, which is this one, occurred here in the southern boundary. So to further quantify this time we wanted to find let's say a global measure. We computed the eddy fluxes of O2, and we compare across the depths, both the north and the equator and the poleward boundaries, and we found that they roughly coincide with the FSLE average here at which is the blue line. And so we found that there is a correlation between the evolution of the eddy fluxes and the evolution of the FSLE lines on both boundaries. And actually, we found that when we compared the eddy fluxes with the mean fluxes, we found that eddy fluxes are not only larger, but they are also positive, meaning that they are carrying O2 into the OMC. While the mean fluxes, they are 1 order of magnitude smaller, and they are removing O2 from the OMC. And so by this time, our conclusion is that we have a good correlation between the mesoscale dynamics and the OMZ boundaries, as given by the average FSLE. that the mesoscale eddies, they are ventilating the OMZ episodically, and so the Lagrangian structures around them allow them to maintain very high rich oxygen waters and allow them to carry them into the OMC, and that the mesoscale eddy fluxes, well, they are much larger than the mean fluxes and they carry O2 into the OMC. So finally, on our third study, where we looked at a transport by a coastal filament, this in the Iberian upwelling region. So the Iberian upwelling region is another upwelling region, but it is also, it's characterized by the existence of coastal cold water filaments. So here again we use the three-dimensional ROMS simulations done by Martin Margameda, who kindly provided with the data. And here again we computed the FSLA fields daily for 45 days, but here we use a smaller resolution, a smaller initial distance, but we kept the final distance again at the mesoscale. And also we use 30 vertical layers. So just to give you, to explain the setting of our study, here we have the coast, here we have a warm anticyclone. This warm anticyclone approaches the coast and starts to pull fluid, cold water into the offshore. And this cold water, it flows along this line, forming this filament, and then it starts to accumulate in a new cyclone. So, and eventually the water will feed the cyclone, and they will merge together, the cyclone and the cyclone, to form a dipole. So when we look at the backward FSLA fields, we can immediately identify the position of the filament here as this low FSLA region. We can see that the surface FSLA maps are very noisy, and they start to become more regular as we go deeper. Near the coastal region, we find we have similar patches of low finite size Lyapunov exponent. We also find very low finite size Lyapunov exponent inside the anticyclonic eddy, but there is, along its boundaries, we see high finite size Lyapunov exponent, meaning that there is a Lagrangian barrier around this anticyclone. On the vertical, on a vertical cut taken at this longitude, we can identify the filament as this very shallow and thin region with very low FSLE. And what we can see here, the distribution of FSLE inside the cyclone, which is mainly 0, and also here inside the anticyclone, and also here inside the cyclone where we have very low FSLE. So then we proceed to look at what was happening inside the filament. Here we can see the filament inside, it shows a very low FSLE, as I have shown you before. Here you can see we plotted, here is the profile data, the profile position. You see the filament is very shallow, but it increases its depth at the root. Here on the temperature map, we can see that the temperature increases as we move offshore, and that the salinity also increases. And you can see here this doming of the isotherms, and this we believe it's caused by the presence of the cyclone. So the cyclone is here, and it is making the to move up. So those were an Eulerian perspective of what was happening inside the filament. Here we took a Lagrangian perspective by releasing particles at several depths on the root of the filament and observing their evolution. So we can see that the particles that are released at the depths of the filament, they move through the filament and end up south inside the cyclone, while the particles that are released at lower depths, at the increasing depths, they do not follow the filament, and instead they circulate north and enter the anticyclonic circulation. And surprisingly, we found that if you look here at the temperature and salinity diagram computed at each of the particle positions, we can see, so the lines are constant density lines. We see that the trajectories inside the filament, they more or less follow paths of constant density, while the other particles that go into the anticyclone, they show high variations in their density, because of the temperature variations mainly. So this was the conditions inside, and now we wanted to look at the three-dimensional structures and how are they affecting these dynamics. So we can see here first some three-dimensional structures here limiting the inside of the filament. So you can see that here it would be the anticyclone, and here you can see its Lagrangian boundaries here in green. We can also see the anticyclone. We can also see the cyclone, and we see that this blue surface is mostly limiting, preventing its contact with the filament water. And here a third limiting surface that is making the water flow turn right and enter the cyclone here. And finally, when you compare the position of the surfaces with temperature and salinity maps, we see that they mainly are located between the transition between the cyclone and the anticyclone, and that there is, let's say, a loose relation between the structure of the temperature and salinity fields and the position of these Lagrangian 3D coherent structures. So conclusions here. Well, the first conclusion is that a coastal filament is characterized by low finite size Lyapunov exponent values. They indicate there is a negligible dispersion. Its interior means that the particles inside are flowing closely to each other without changing much the relative position. The filament is shallow, and the waters in it, they maintain their density. The filament limits are provided by the Lagrangian structures that form the boundaries of the anticyclone and the associated cyclone, and they prevent the mixing of the filament water during its offshore advection. And of course, it means that in a Lagrangian sense, the filament itself, there aren't Lagrangian structures directly associated to the filament. Instead, the filament is created by the Lagrangian structures that limit the anticyclone and the associated cyclone. So, the general conclusions that we draw from this study that I've shown. So, we have shown that dynamical systems theory provides useful tools to study the turbulent motions in the ocean using a Lagrangian perspective. The finite size Lyapunov exponent can be used to detect Lagrangian structures in 3 dimensions. These Lagrangian structures, they have similar properties to the Eulerian ones, but they have a clearly material character. And we have seen that in these studies of oceanic settings, that the mesoscale Lagrangian structures, they mainly have a curtain-like shape due to the small vertical motions. They form boundaries to mesoscale eddies, and they control the transport in and out of the eddies. They enhance eddy fluxes of oceanic traces, and they provide avenues to coastal and offshore exchange, as we saw in the example of the cold water filaments. So, to finish, to acknowledge that I have been funded by the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology. This work, I have been funded as a PhD candidate, but in addition, the work has received support from several projects of the Ministério da Economia e Competitividade, like Project Físicos, a Escola, and also from the CSIC Intermediate Project Turbulent. And finally, my special acknowledgements to my supervisors and my colleagues and oceanographers and physicists that I have worked with. They taught me very much all I know about physical oceanography. And also to my fellow colleagues of the PhD room, I'd like to extend a very warm Thank you. And thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Let's go to start with the questions, and we will start with Professor.
Oh, that is correct. Well,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so I would like to start maybe with a technical question. So because so you have used the technique of finite size Lyapunov exponents, but